Hello everybody, welcome to the I Am IT YouTube channel. My name is Shabazz and as ever, I am the IT Geek. Welcome back to another AZ700 Designing and Implementing Microsoft Azure Network Solutions episode. I kind of got my wires a bit crossed. I think I've said in the last couple of episodes that this would be the last module, but it's not. In fact, we've got module 5. And this is actually the last episode within module 4. It's a very short module. Module 5 will also be a very short module. So yeah, just we're gonna have a few more episodes, not many, probably single numbers now. But yeah, this is the last one of module 4. So let's get started with this episode. So we're not going to have Mohammed Saji today because there's no lab in this one. The topic that we're going to cover, he actually covered the lab in the last episode. So today is, as I mentioned, we are still on with designing and implementing private access to Azure services, module 4. Specifically, we're going to talk about designing and implementing service endpoints. So we're going to talk about choosing when to use a service endpoint. We're going to talk about configuring service endpoints policies. And then we'll finish off by talking about configuring access to service endpoints as well. So first topic is, let's talk about choosing when to use an actual service endpoint. So you use a virtual network service endpoint to extend your private address space in Azure by providing sort of direct connectivity to your Azure services. The service endpoints let you secure your Azure services to only your virtual network, and then service traffic will remain on that Azure backbone then, and it doesn't go out to the internet. By default, Azure services are all designed to actually talk directly to the internet. On all Azure services, they have public IP address, including PaaS services as well, such as your Azure SQL databases and Azure storage. Because these services are exposed to the internet, anyone can potentially access your Azure services. It's a bit of a security risk. Service endpoints can connect those PaaS services directly to your private address space in Azure. So they act like they're on the same virtual network. And adding service endpoints doesn't remove that public endpoint. It just simply provides like a redirection of traffic essentially. So let's talk about configuring service endpoint policies specifically. So service endpoints are available on multiple services, including, I mentioned Azure Storage before, Azure SQL Database, but also things like Azure Synapse Analytics, Azure Cosmos DB, and Azure Key Vault, to name a few. There are many more, obviously, which you can look up yourself. There are many benefits to using service endpoint policies. For example, your VNet private address space can overlap. So you can't use overlapping spaces to uniquely identify traffic without originating from the VNet. Service endpoints enable securing of Azure service resources to your virtual network by extending that VNet identity to the service. Once you enable the sort of service endpoints in your virtual network, you can add a virtual network rule to secure those Azure service resources to your virtual network. The rule is like addition provides that improved security by fully removing that public internet access to those resources and allowing traffic only from your virtual network. I think we mentioned that before. Another benefit, today, sort of any routes in your virtual network that force internet traffic to your on-premises or your virtual appliances also force Azure service traffic to take the same route as that internet traffic. Service endpoints provides optimal routing for that Azure traffic. You no longer, need reserved public IP addresses in your virtual networks to secure those resources through an IP firewall. There are no network address translation, so NAT or gateway devices required to set up the service endpoint. You can configure service endpoints through a single selection of a subnet. So there's no extra overhead of maintaining those endpoints, so a much simpler setup really. So let's stay on this topic of configuring your service endpoint policies by just talking we've talked about the benefits. Let's talk about some of the actual limitations of service endpoint. So one of them is that the features are only available to virtual networks deployed through an Azure Resource Manager deployment model, so not through classic deployment. Endpoints can't be used for traffic from your on-premises services to the Azure services. For Azure SQL specifically, a service endpoint applies only to Azure service traffic within a virtual network's region. just region specific. And for Azure Data Lake storage or ADLS, Gen 1 specifically, the VNet integration capability is only available for virtual networks within the same region as well. So again, region specific for Data Lake. Let's move on now to talk about configuring access to service endpoints. So service endpoint policies enable you to filter virtual network traffic to specific Azure resources over that service endpoint. Before you can associate a policy to a subnet, you have to create a virtual network and subnet. Once you have that virtual network and sort of subnet set up, you need to configure virtual network service endpoints for Azure storage. And on the virtual network blade, you go to selecting that service endpoint, and in the next pane, you'll see the sort of, you can select that Microsoft.storage, and under the subnets, select the desired VNets or subnets that you want to configure it with. And as well as doing that through Azure Portal, you can also use the PowerShell and Azure CLI to configure service endpoints. So that was a very, very quick overview of designing implementing service endpoints. As I mentioned, we're not going to have a lab in this episode, but we kind of sat, Mohammed Sajid had already covered service endpoints in the last lab. But if you want to do that as well, you can use the link in the description to the GitHub labs. By all means, and do that for yourself. Do it through PowerShell, do it through Azure CLI, and do it through the portal, as I said. So that is the end of module 4. Very short module. Again, it's only, I think it only covers a small percentage, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think it covers like a small percentage. Again, I think it's like 15 to 20%. And again, because when we first started doing this AZ700 series, it was the sort of breakdown from Microsoft was a certain way, and then they changed it halfway through. So there are a few topics that have moved around, but for now, this is all we're going to do in module 4. We've already covered some of the sort of other connectivity within. We've already covered the other areas within this whole series as well. So any questions? Obviously, you've got mine and Sajid's socials in the description. Drop us a line, drop me a comment, or give me a tweet, or connect with me on LinkedIn. So thank you for watching. And we're going to do it's going to be secure network connectivity to Azure resources in the next module. So stay tuned to that. But thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.